The Last of the Mohicans, by James Fenimore Cooper. It was a feature of the colonial wars of North America that the toils and dangers of the wilderness were to be encountered before the troops could be brought to contend with their European enemies. The savage tribes of the frontier, leaving the broader differences of faith and policy to be vindicated by their wise white allies, had drawn the tomahawk and were warring according to their own fell nature. The northern portion of the province of New York in the year 1757 was the bloody arena of these contests. Here the forests, yet vast and trackless, stretched for leagues, a wilderness of gloom, broken only by those lakes and rivers which lay like silver mirrors embedded in the dark foliage. It was on a day in the midst of summer that a small party was seen traversing this disputed territory. Two females, emerging from the thicker forest, rode into a little opening where a clear spring welled from the earth. They were attended by a single male companion, a youthful officer in the royal uniform, and an Indian guide, whose sinister countenance and roving eye might have excited suspicion in one more accustomed to the subtleties of the woods. The elder female, whose dark, rich coloring and proud, thoughtful brow bespoke a spirit of energy, was Cora Monroe. The younger, her half-sister, was Alice, a fair, fragile creature with hair like spun gold and eyes of cerulean blue. Their companion was Major Duncan Hayward of the 60th Royal Americans, who, entrusted with their safety, was endeavoring to conduct them from Fort Edward to the beleaguered post of William Henry, then held by their father, Colonel Monroe. Their guide, a Huron by birth who had earned the appellation of Le Renard Subtil, or the Subtle Fox, had professed a knowledge of a shorter path. But now, as the sun began to decline, even Hayward's unpracticed eye detected that their guide had either lost or intentionally forsaken the faint trace. It was in this moment of rising alarm that they were joined by a most singular individual, a man of gaunt figure and attire that partook of both savage and civilized life. He was a teacher of psalmody, David Gamut by name, whose guileless nature was as remarkable as his ungainly appearance. As the shadows lengthened, and Magua, the guide, offered only evasive answers, the travelers were startled by the sharp report of a rifle echoing from the woods. The sound was followed by the appearance of three men issuing from the covert. The first was a white man, well past the meridian of life, but with a frame of iron and an eye of piercing keenness. Clad in a hunting shirt of forest green and bearing a long rifle of surpassing beauty, he was the scout known to the woods as Hawkeye. His companions were two Indians, the last of a noble race. The elder, Chingachgook, or the Great Serpent, bore the dignity of a sachem. The younger, his son Uncas, was the epitome of savage grace and manly beauty. He was, indeed, the last of the Mohicans. Hawkeye, whose real name was Natty Bumppo, quickly perceived the treachery of Magua. "The varlet!" he exclaimed, his long rifle killdeer poised with practiced ease. "He has led you into an ambush of the Mingoes?" No sooner had the words been spoken than the forest erupted with the yells of the Hurons, and a desperate conflict ensued. Magua, with a cry of baffled rage, vanished into the thicket, but his confederates pressed the attack. The courage of Hayward, the silent prowess of the Mohicans, and the unerring aim of the scout, however, proved superior. The assailants were repulsed, leaving the little party masters of the field, though now fully sensible of their extreme peril. Their only recourse was flight. Under the guidance of the scout and his companions, the party embarked upon a difficult journey toward the shores of the Horican, as the Mohicans termed the beautiful expanse of Lake George. They sought refuge in a secret cavern upon an island, a rocky fastness where the Mohicans had often hidden. Here, amid the roar of the falls at Glenn's, they passed an anxious night. The scout and his red allies discoursed upon the nature of their respective gifts. "I am a man without a cross," said Hawkeye, "white by birth but educated by the Delawares. Yet my gifts are white gifts. A Mingo is a Mingo, and God made him so." But their repose was short-lived. The subtlety of Magua had tracked them. As dawn broke, They were assailed by a superior force of Hurons, borne down the rapids in their bark canoes. A desperate chase and battle upon the water ensued. Though Uncas and his father displayed prodigious skill, and Hawkeye's rifle spoke with its usual deadly effect, their numbers were too few. Seeing their capture inevitable, the scout and the Mohicans slipped into the water, escaping to the forest, leaving Hayward, Gamut, and the terrified sisters to the mercy of their captors. Magua, his eyes burning with a triumphant and implacable hatred, now revealed the motive of his treachery. He had once been scourged from the British ranks by order of Colonel Munro for drunkenness. Now he sought his vengeance. "The pale-faced girl with the dark eye," he declared, pointing to Cora, "shall go to the wigwam of Magua and lighten his heart." Cora met his gaze with unquailing courage, refusing his proposal with scorn. Enraged, Magua prepared for immediate violence, but the providential return of Hawkeye and the Mohicans, who had watched for an opportunity, turned the tide. Another fierce struggle, and the Hurons were again defeated. Magua, though wounded by Hawkeye, again escaped the grasp of his enemies. The party, now reunited, pressed onward with renewed diligence. After much toil, they gained the summit of a mountain which overlooked the plain of William Henry. A fearful sight met their eyes. The banner of France waved over the outworks of the fort, and the surrounding plain was filled with the camps of Montcalm's army. The siege was in full progress. Under cover of a dense fog, Hawkeye succeeded in guiding the party through the French lines and the morass, past slumbering sentinels, and at last into the gates of the beleaguered fortress. The joy of the sisters' reunion with their father was profound, yet tinged with sorrow. Colonel Munro, a veteran of lion-like heart, was worn with care. His garrison was weak, his ammunition spent, and his hopes of reinforcement from General Webb at Fort Edward were extinguished. He beheld his daughters, restored to him only, perhaps, to share a bloody fate. It was here, in this hour of extremity, that Hayward, pressing his suit for the hand of Alice, learned the secret of Cora's birth. She was the child of Munro's first wife, a woman whose lineage was tinged with the blood of the West Indies. This dark secret, which Munro feared would be a barrier to her happiness, only elevated her in Hayward's esteem, though his heart remained devoted to the gentler Alice. The brave defense could not last. Montcalm, a chivalrous and able commander, offered honorable terms of surrender. The garrison was to march out with the honors of war, retaining their colors and personal baggage, under pledge of not serving again for 18 months. Munro, compelled by necessity, accepted. What followed was a scene of horror that forever stained the annals of that frontier war. The savage allies of Montcalm, cheated of their promised plunder and scalps and inflamed by liquor, broke through the feeble French guard and fell upon the unarmed and defenseless column of departing English. A frightful massacre began. Men, women, and children were indiscriminately butchered. Yells of demons filled the air, mingled with the shrieks of victims. In the midst of this appalling confusion, Magua reappeared. Seizing the terrified Alice, he bore her away, while Cora, refusing to be separated, followed her sister into the frantic throng. David Gamut, his non-combatant status respected only by his own unwavering faith, followed them, lifting his voice in a hymn. Hawkeye, Hayward, and the Mohicans, separated from their charges in the tumult, were forced to fight their way clear, witnessing atrocities they were powerless to prevent. Munro, bereft of his children, was led away, a broken man. The massacre ended, leaving the plain a field of blood. The pursuit began. Hawkeye, his Mohican friends, Hayward, and the grieving Colonel Munro assembled in the ruins of a blockhouse. The scout, reading the subtle signs of the forest, soon determined that Magua had fled with his captives toward the Huron villages, likely separating the sisters. Uncas, with unerring skill, found the trail. They followed with the patience and determination of men whose lives were devoted to the wilderness. Their journey led them deep into the domain of the hostile tribes. After several days, they came upon David Gamut, wandering unharmed, his simple mind and sacred calling as a man out of his mind, serving as his protection among the superstitious savages. From him they learned that Alice was held in a nearby Huron camp, while Cora had been conveyed to a village of the Delawares, or Lenni Lenape, a subjugated tribe residing on the banks of a neighboring river. A plan of rescue was formed. Hayward, disguising himself as a French doctor, boldly entered the Huron camp, trusting to his knowledge of the language. Hawkeye, after a time, followed him, concealed within the skin of a bear, a medicine man's disguise. Uncas remained on watch, while Chingachgook guarded their rear. Hayward, through his assumed character, located Alice, who was confined in a cave. But he was soon confronted by Magua himself. At the critical moment, Hawkeye appeared. The bearskin was thrown aside, revealing the dreaded La Longue Carabine. Magua was overpowered and bound. The scout then rescued Hayward and Alice, leading them from the village under cover of darkness, and entrusting the girl to the care of her lover, sent them toward the Delaware camp. Hawkeye, however, returned to the Huron village, a deed of surpassing boldness, to rescue Uncas, who, in a separate endeavor, had been captured. The scout was discovered, and the two friends were brought before the assembled Hurons. Their fate seemed sealed. But at that moment Hayward returned, not with Alice, but with Chingachgook, declaring that Magua, their prisoner, would be exchanged for the scout. The Hurons, though enraged, were forced to release Hawkeye, retaining Uncas as their sole prize. The focus now shifted to the Delaware village, where all parties converged. Here resided the ancient and venerated Sachem, Tamenund, a patriarch who had seen a century of his people's decline. Magua appeared, leading Cora as his captive, and demanded judgment according to Delaware law. He claimed her as the prize of war. Hawkeye, Hayward, and their party also arrived, seeking justice and the release of their friends. The great council was assembled. Before the ancient Tamenund, Magua presented his claim. Cora, with noble dignity, pleaded her own cause, but the laws of the tribes were inflexible. She was awarded to the Huron. But as Magua prepared to depart with his victim, a commotion arose. Uncas was brought in, a captive of the Hurons, and stood before the sage. As the Delaware warriors began to torment the captive, a small tortoise tattooed on Uncas's breast was revealed. This was the sacred totem of the great Turtle tribe, from which Tamenund himself was descended. The ancient sachem, roused from his lethargy, recognized the young warrior. Uncas, the bounding elk, was no mere brave, but the son of Chingachgook, the last of the pure blood of the Unami, the rightful sachem of the Lenni Lenape. The Delawares, electrified, turned from their subjugation to acclaim their long-lost leader. Uncas, in a moment, was transformed from a captive to a king. His first command was for the release of Cora. But Magua, though thwarted, was not defeated. "The paleface is my prisoner," he sneered. "Le renard subtil is not a dog." He reminded Tamenund that, by the laws of hospitality, he was free to depart. "Let the Huron depart in peace," decreed the ancient judge. Magua, grasping Cora, fled into the forest. "The pale-faced girl is mine," he cried. "Uncas, follow!" Uncas, now at the head of the aroused Delaware warriors, led the pursuit. Hawkeye, Hayward, Chingachgook, and Gamut joined the chase. A long and terrible battle ensued through the forest and across the mountains. The Hurons made a stand. Uncas, seeing Cora in the grasp of two of Magua's minions upon a precipice, bounded forward, outstripping his followers. He slew one of her captors, but as he turned, the knife of another was buried in his back. He fell, the last warrior of his race, striking vainly at his foe. Cora, seeing his fate, raised her eyes to heaven in a prayer. The savage who had slain Uncas, enraged at her passivity, raised his tomahawk. At that instant, Magua, who had commanded the deed, leaped forward, but too late. The blow fell. Cora sank lifeless at his feet. Magua, glaring at his handiwork, was himself struck down. The rifle of Hawkeye had spoken for the last time against the subtle fox. Le renard subtil fell, and his spirit passed into the wilderness. The battle was won, but the victory was ashes. The next day was one of mourning. The Delawares gathered to lament their fallen chief. Uncas was buried with the honors of a sachem. The Delaware maidens chanted the virtues of the departed. They laid Cora, the dark-haired daughter of the pale-face, by his side, that in the land of spirits her gentle soul might find companionship with the noble warrior who had died to save her. David Gamut raised a hymn, his voice trembling with a grief that had broken through his singular delusion. Hayward and Alice, their own survival overshadowed by the tragic sacrifice, stood weeping. Colonel Monroe, his heart broken, could only gaze upon the grave of his child. But the deepest grief was that of the father. Chingachgook stood over the grave of his son, his stoicism shattered. He lamented the loss of his boy, the last hope of his lineage. "My race is gone," he said, his voice deep with an unutterable sorrow. "The pale faces are masters of the earth, and the time of the red men has not yet come again. I am alone." Hawkeye, grasping the hand of his old friend, offered the only comfort he knew. "No, Sagamore, not alone," said the scout, the tears rolling unheeded down his own weather-beaten cheeks. "The gifts of our colors may be different, but God has cast our lot in the same wilderness. I have no kin, and I see no cross. We shall be, brothers." As the party prepared to return to the settlements, Tamenund, the ancient seer, looked upon the scene. "The pale faces are masters of the earth," he murmured, his voice feeble with age. "The sun of the Lenape has set. I have lived to see the last warrior of the wise race of the Mohicans.